10 ridiculous rumors about historic royals. The public loves a good story about the salacious private lives of the rich and famous, and royals often really did get up to some jaw-dropping behaviors. But sometimes a grain of rumor can be so enthralling that it snowballs into an unshakable myth. If you ask the average person what they know about Catherine the Great, they are likely to say, "Isn't she the one who was crushed under a horse?" Many are still convinced that Queen Elizabeth I was really a man, and Marie Antoinette will forever be linked to the misquote, "Let them eat cake." Today, let's explore 10 commonly believed myths about historic royals, explain how the rumors got started, and separate what is gospel from what is just gossip. Anne Boleyn was a witch with 6 fingers. Anne Boleyn was a minor noble and not especially beautiful. She was not the type of woman anyone would have expected to become Queen of England. But when Henry VIII annulled his marriage to Catherine of Aragon for failing to bear him a son, it was Anne whom he took to be his second bride. Because the Pope refused to dissolve the king's first marriage, Henry split with the Catholic Church and established the Church of England with himself as its head. Many devout Catholics died as martyrs rather than accept the king's new edict. Rumors flew that Anne was a witch who was using dark magic to seduce the king off the path of righteousness. In reality, Anne resisted the king's advances, but he wouldn't leave her alone. And while she was a devout Protestant, it was egotistical Henry who spearheaded the conversion and demanded his people accept his queen or die. Anne, too, disappointed Henry by giving birth to a daughter, Elizabeth. Her second child was miscarried. When her enemies conjured up false evidence of adultery and incest, the king was all too eager to have his wife beheaded so that he could marry again. Anne's sexually sinful accusations and hasty execution poured fuel on the theory that she was a sorceress and that the king had finally escaped her clutches. During the reign of Anne's daughter, Elizabeth, the diabolical rumors gained a tangible detail. Nicholas Sanders, a Catholic priest who wanted to discredit the queen by attacking her mother, wrote in his 1585 book that Anne had a 6th finger. Polydactyly is a genetic mutation. In modern Europeans, it occurs in about 1 per 1,300 babies. In the Middle Ages, women accused of witchcraft were routinely stripped so that inquisitors could check their bodies for a devil's mark. Any mole or scar was a sign of a deal with the devil, and a teat at which a witch's familiar would suckle. A 6th finger would certainly qualify. English love song Green Sleeves is often attributed to Henry VIII. It is said that Anne wore long green sleeves to conceal her extra digit. But Henry didn't actually write the folk tune, which first appeared in 1580, well after his death. If Anne did have a 6th finger, superstitious Henry would never have given her a second glance. Recent historians have worked hard to dispel the image of Anne as a temptress, though the popular image of her is derived from hypersexualized novels and dramas, and the portrayal of Anne as a witch lingers. Her portrait can be seen hanging in Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry in Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. Mary I was Bloody Mary. Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon's only surviving child, succeeded to the throne in 1553 after her younger brother, Edward VI, died at just 15. Like her mother, Mary was a staunch Catholic and resented her father's Protestant church. Her priority as monarch was to return her nation to the path of righteousness and make everyone Catholic again. But undoing her father and brother's work was harder than she'd hoped. She ordered 3 prominent Protestants to be publicly burned at the stake, including Thomas Cranmer, who had facilitated her parents' divorce. About 800 wealthy Protestants fled the country. Those who remained became targets of persecution. Mary enacted hearsay laws which allowed local governments to execute people in a witch hunt atmosphere. Altogether, 280 Protestants were burned at the stake, gaining Mary a great deal of hatred and the nickname Bloody Mary. But was Mary I so much bloodier than her contemporaries? Her 280 victims are less than her successor, Elizabeth I, who killed 650, and both body counts pale in comparison to their father, Henry VIII, who executed a staggering 57,000 people. And when it comes to beheading close family members, Mary did reluctantly order the beheading of her cousin Jane Grey, who was a political pawn in a plot to take the throne. But Elizabeth ordered the death of her cousin, Mary Queen of Scots, under similar circumstances. Meanwhile, Henry murdered 2 of his wives, Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard, because they hurt his feelings. So why do we say Bloody Mary and not Bloody Henry? First, there's good old misogyny. And after Mary died at 52, Elizabeth converted the nation back to Protestantism. The winning religion writes history, so Mary I will forever be remembered as Bloody Mary. The Queen's gruesome moniker became part of popular culture with a spooky children's legend and a vodka and tomato juice cocktail. In the game, young people dare each other to stare into a mirror in a dimly lit room and repeat the name Bloody Mary 3 times. According to legend, this will evoke the spirit of Mary, who will grab the child and drag them into the mirror. This game has no historic link to Mary Tudor, but was invented by Victorian children. The cocktail was named after a Parisian dancer who, in the 1920s, worked at a cabaret called Bucket of Blood. Elizabeth I was actually a man. Elizabeth was a far more effective leader than her sister Mary. She was astonishingly intelligent and forceful, taking the reins of power and stunning her male counselors, who expected a queen to be a pushover. During her 44-year reign, England prospered in wealth, culture, and world power. Before her, no one, including her own father, thought that a woman had the mental or emotional capacity to rule. Even after Gloriana's glorious reign, many couldn't comprehend her success, or the fact that she refused to marry and give birth to children. So conspiracy theories emerged that Elizabeth must have been a man in disguise. This blatantly misogynistic concept has endured. Bram Stoker of Dracula fame wrote in his 1910 book, Famous Impostors, that the real Princess Elizabeth had died of illness in childhood. Her nurses, fearing the wrath of the king, quickly dressed the nearest ginger child, a peasant boy, in the princess's gown. When Henry VIII, who rarely saw his daughter, was fooled, the nurses went all in and trained the boy to carry himself like a lady. This theory holds no water. Henry had other children who died young of illness, and their caregivers were not blamed or punished. However, deceiving the king by swapping out his child would have meant a death sentence. What's more, Elizabeth was constantly surrounded by ladies-in-waiting who helped her dress, bathe, and relieve herself. It would have been impossible for her to conceal from them if she had actually been a man. Maids were even bribed to inform ambassadors about the Queen's periods, which, by the way, were regular. In 1985, R. Bacon published a paper titled Queen Elizabeth I, A Case for Testicular Feminization. He argued that Elizabeth had a syndrome, which meant she appeared externally female, but actually had XY chromosomes, internal testicles, and no uterus. There were rumors during Elizabeth's lifetime that her anatomy was atypical in some way, but these were whispered by male ambassadors to slander her for refusing the suits of the monarchs they represented. Elizabeth's real reasons for refusing to marry were more psychological. Her own mother had been murdered by her father, and according to the laws of the time, if she wed, her husband would become king and take all her power. To this day, women of power and influence are beyond comprehension to some, and are routinely accused of being men in disguise. In this, Elizabeth I is in good company with Michelle Obama, Lady Gaga, and many others. Queen Juana was Loca. Juana of Castile is still popularly known as Juana la Loca, or Joanna the Mad. After her only brother Juan died of illness, she became sole heir to the kingdoms of both her mother, Queen Isabel of Castile, and her father, King Fernando of Aragon. At 16, her mother subjected her to torture to shake her of her rebellious teenage religious doubts. She was wed to Philip the Handsome, son of the Holy Roman Emperor. She fell desperately in love with him, though he had a wandering eye. Juana often flew into jealous rages and sank into depressions. She supposedly stabbed one of her husband's mistresses in the face with a pair of scissors. When her mother Isabel died, Juana became Queen of Castile. But her husband and father fought over her kingdom. Both exaggerated stories of Juana's mental instability in their bids for control. The tug-of-war ended when Philip died suddenly of illness or possibly poisoning at 28. Juana, pregnant with her 6th child, refused to leave his open coffin and kissed and embraced his corpse. During the weeks-long journey to his tomb in Granada, the queen insisted that they travel only at night, so no women would be overwhelmed with desire for her dearly departed. Of course, this whole story was likely exaggerated or even made up entirely by her father, who now had a clear path to controlling Castile. He locked his widowed daughter up in the royal palace of Santa Clara. When Fernando died, Juana became Queen of Aragon, but she had no idea that Spain had been united under her. Her son, Charles, pressured her to sign Spain over to him. Far from grateful, he married off his youngest sister, Catherine, to the King of Portugal, depriving his mother of her only remaining companion. After 45 years of solitude and misery, Juana died at the age of 75. But was she truly mad? Historians have speculated that she may have suffered from depression, bipolar disorder, psychosis, or schizophrenia. She did come from a notoriously inbred family, and many of her ancestors and descendants experienced mental illness. However, many of the reports of Juana's actions were likely propaganda spread by her father, husband, and son in order to steal her throne. Catherine the Great loved horses, literally. Empress Catherine II of Russia really did have numerous human lovers. She was taken from Poland as a naive 16-year-old girl and wed to the future Tsar Peter III. He was mentally ill, abusive, and probably impotent. But Catherine was blamed for failing to bear an heir. She soon wised up and began having secret affairs. Most likely, none of her 4 children were fathered by Peter. In 1762, she overthrew her husband with the help of her lover, Grigory Orlov, and had herself crowned Tsarina. Orlov likely strangled Peter in prison. During Catherine's 34-year reign, she patronized culture and science, founded cities, universities, and theaters, and built Russia into one of the greatest powers of Europe. All the while, she maintained a long-term relationship with her dearest friend, Grigory Potemkin, and had a rotation of young and handsome men at her beck and call. When she grew tired of a boyfriend, they left her service with generous pensions, lands, and titles. She helped one former lover to become the King of Poland. But women of the 18th century were not supposed to be in control of their sexuality, and Catherine was widely slandered by her enemies. The worst rumor of all came after her death at the age of 67. It was claimed that the Empress had died in the midst of a lewd act with a horse, that her favorite mount was suspended above her when the ropes snapped and the animal crushed her to death. This astonishing story is, of course, completely fictional and born out of misogyny and prejudice. It was widely circulated in satirical publications in Britain and France, enemies of Russia. Similar slander involving horses was commonly used to paint Russians as barbaric. Catherine the Great actually suffered a stroke while at her desk. She was carried to bed, where she died the next day. The 2020 drama, The Great, made light of this ridiculous equine rumor and included ladies of the court neighing at Catherine. Marie Antoinette said, "Let them eat cake." The youngest daughter of Holy Roman Empress, Maria Theresa, arrived in France as an innocent 15-year-old bride to the future King Louis XVI. She lived a sheltered life at the Palace of Versailles, ignorant of the desperate poverty of the French people. The Queen amused herself with socializing, gambling, and outrageous fashion. She also gave generously to charities and adopted 6 poor orphaned children. France's financial woes were the result of costly wars, an expensive extended royal family, and the unwillingness of the aristocracy or clergy to relinquish their financial privileges. The Queen was not solely to blame for the economic depression that spurred the French Revolution, but her decadent spending made her a scapegoat. Pamphlets dubbed her Madame Deficit, and it was widely circulated that when she was told the French people had run out of bread, she responded, "Let them eat cake." This phrase has become synonymous with Marie Antoinette, but she never uttered it. This quote originally appears in philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau's autobiography, Les Confessions. He writes, "I recall the stopgap solution of a great princess who was told that the peasants had no bread, and who responded, qu'ils mangent de la brioche." Brioche is a sweet bread enriched with eggs and butter, ingredients which were rare for the poor. The great princess to which Rousseau refers could not have been Marie Antoinette. His book was completed in 1767, 3 years before she arrived in France. Nevertheless, many believed the Queen did say "let them eat cake," and her reputation for ruinous spending and callousness towards her starving people led her to the guillotine in 1793 at the age of 37. This famous misquote was referenced in the 2006 biopic Marie Antoinette. Napoleon told Josephine, "Don't wash." In the wake of the French Revolution, Corsican General Napoleon Bonaparte leveraged his military power to become Emperor of the French. He conquered much of Europe, but his heart had been conquered by a woman, Josephine. While he was away with the army, he sent home numerous letters dripping with affection and lust. Among the ample smut, Napoleon's most famously suggestive memo to Josephine was, "Je reviens en 3 jours. Ne te lave pas. I will return in 3 days. Don't wash." This quote is celebrated by olfactophiles and frequently cited in articles on human sexuality. It certainly fits the pattern of the emperor's amorous letters, over 250 of which have been cataloged. But this particular quote cannot be found among them. Undoubtedly, some messages have been lost, and the 1981 book, Napoleon, Letters d'amour à Joséphine, claims the quote is genuine. But both Napoleon and Josephine were the subjects of boundless unflattering rumors. Starting wars all over Europe does tend to earn one a few enemies. The insinuation that Napoleon and Josephine were unhygienic fits right in with other myths about them, including that he was abnormally short. At 5'2", he was average height for a man of his time. That he shot off the nose of the Sphinx during cannon practice, though illustrations from before his birth show that the nose was already gone. And that Napoleon's little corporal was removed during his autopsy, mummified, and is still privately owned. That one may be true, but as the allegedly shriveled 1-inch appendage has never been DNA tested, we do not know for sure. Much like his famously smelly sentiment to Josephine, unless the original is found and verified, we will never know. Prince Albert had a Prince Albert piercing. Queen Victoria and her German husband, Albert of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, were some of the most famous prudes in history. But when a certain below-the-belt piercing became known as a Prince Albert, myths about the consort's secret kinky side grew. Supposedly, Albert was well endowed, which didn't fit with the 19th century fashion for tight trousers. So he installed a dressing ring in order to keep things tucked away. Both he and Regency dandy Beau Brummel have been credited with the invention of the dressing ring, and it is said that tailors would inquire of Victorian gentlemen, "Do you dress to the left or the right?" Similar covert piercings do have a long history. They were illustrated in the Kama Sutra, written in India in 400 BCE. In Europe, sailor culture involves piercing and tattoos, and even ladies, including Victoria, did have pierced ears. But it is unlikely that the prince consort, whose primary role was to father heirs, would have put his royal family jewels at risk at a time before antibiotics. The urban legend actually goes back to the 1970s, when Doug Malloy published a pamphlet to promote his friend's West Hollywood piercing studio. Malloy claimed Roman centurions attached their capes to nipple rings, and that Prince Albert sported a dressing ring. While this titillating story is false, historians have uncovered evidence that Victoria and Albert were not as prudish as we thought. They did have 9 children after all. Victoria gushed in her diary about her wedding night. "I never spent such an evening. My dearest dear Albert. His excessive love and affection give me feelings of heavenly happiness I never could have hoped to have felt before." Unusually for the time, Albert was most likely a virgin on their wedding night and remained faithful throughout his life. Victoria and Albert carefully concealed their private pleasures in order to project an air of moral perfection to the public. And their pristine portrayal was protected in death by their daughter, Beatrice. She transcribed a lifetime of the Queen's journals, editing out any unsaintly bits and burning the originals. Victoria's reputation was solidified until her correspondence was recently published, painting her as a more complete person who threw temper tantrums, roared with laughter, and loved sex with her husband. Prince Albert Victor was really Jack the Ripper. In 1888, the corpses of 5 sex workers were discovered in Whitechapel, London. The surgical nature of the slayings led police to suspect that the killer had medical training and might have been a gentleman. One of the most intriguing theories is that he might have been Prince Albert Victor, the eldest son of the Prince of Wales and grandson of Queen Victoria. He had a reputation as a playboy and had already been involved in scandal when a homosexual brothel was raided and his close friend was discovered to be a client. Albert Victor, known as Eddie, died suddenly at 28 during an influenza pandemic. His younger brother would later become King George V. In 1970, Dr. Thomas Stowell published an article in The Criminologist claiming Eddie was really Jack the Ripper, that he had contracted syphilis while in the Navy, and that the infection had driven him to an unhinged hatred for sex workers. The royal family knew Eddie was a murderer and ignored it, but finally had him committed to a private hospital on the Sandringham estate. There he died not of flu, but of syphilis. There are a few glaring holes in the story. The royal family took meticulous notes on the whereabouts of its members, and during all 5 murders, Eddie was far from London. Stowell claimed that his source was the private papers of the prince's doctor, Sir William Gull, but these papers have never been found. Another theory claims Eddie was taking painting lessons and became enamored of the artist's model, Annie Crook. She became pregnant and the prince secretly married her. But when Queen Victoria found out, she ordered Annie committed to an asylum, where Dr. Gull performed experiments that drove her insane. The baby, Alice, was rescued by her mother's friend, Mary Jane Kelly, and taken to a convent. But Mary and her 4 friends tried to blackmail the royal family. Thus, Dr. Gull murdered the 5 women to keep them quiet. This theory was the basis for the 2001 movie From Hell, but there is no hard evidence connecting Prince Albert Victor to Jack the Ripper, whose identity remains a mystery. Elizabeth II had 4 cocktails a day. In 2012, Queen Elizabeth's personal chef, Darren McGrady, shared with The Telegraph what Her Majesty typically ate in a day. He included her favorite drink. In the evening, she'd normally have a cocktail, 1 part gin and 2 parts Dubonnet, a sweet French aperitif which is made from fortified wine, herbs, and spices, and was also the Queen Mum's favorite tipple. This small glimpse into the Queen's private life was misquoted and exaggerated by Vanity Fair, The Independent, and other newspapers. Soon, articles claimed that Elizabeth starts her day with a pre-lunch gin and Dubonnet, garnished with a slice of lemon and plenty of ice. With lunch, she enjoys a glass of wine. A cousin claimed that she also sips a dry martini should the mood strike her. Finally, the Queen washes down dinner with a glass of champagne. The liquor-soaked story was now that the Queen, then 86, had 4 alcoholic drinks every day, totaling 6 units of alcohol, making her a binge drinker by UK law. It's easy to see why the story of an elderly lady, rich beyond measure and holding nebulous political power, getting sloshed every day, made for a clickable headline. But the salacious story just isn't true. While the Queen may, on occasion, have indulged in all of the aforementioned libations, she certainly wasn't imbibing all 4 every day. Chef Darren McGrady was eager to set the record straight. He told Reader's Digest, "I'm pretty confident she doesn't have 4 drinks a day. She'd be pickled." Want even more tea on history? Check out the History Tea Time podcast, available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, comment your thoughts, and check out my other royal history videos. If you really want to help, please consider supporting me on Patreon. A link is in the description. Thank you for watching.